Welcome to the Millennial Rant, a podcast about whatever's bothering me today. With topics ranging from politics to pop culture, there's a rant to cover everyone. For more Millennial Rant content, you can join me on the web at millennialrant.com. I don't know how many of you were watching last season. There's an episode that I had planned about roots and how important it is to know who you are and where you come from and how that informs you as a person and your future. And I ended up not being able to do that because my niece Abby had a nightmare and she came into my office and we told stories to each other, which is great for sure. I definitely am glad that we did that, that I was able to be there for her when she needed me. But I never actually got around to doing that video, which I feel is kind of a shame because it is important to know your roots. Our history, family history, personal history, nation history is a huge part of who we are in the present. So I wanted to do that video to kind of give you a little glimpse at what specifically I'm talking about. I'm a Fletcher, that is my surname, and that is what presumably my family did at one point, is we fletched arrows, which is not only making the arrows, but specifically refers to the fletchings, the feathers that were put on the ends of the arrows. And it was very important that those fletchings were done perfectly because that's what causes the arrow to spiral, which is what makes it go straight. So of course, you have to have the shaft and you have to have the arrow point and everything has to be perfectly aligned. Well, that's kind of something that my family has taken and carried on. We all wear arrows on pretty much everything, from jewelry to t-shirts to, pictures on the wall. It's just part of who we are now as much as it was a part of who we were then. I can't say for sure whether we have a long-standing family history as actual Fletchers or not, because at one point we were nobility, and I think that I'm not sure if we were elevated or what the case was. I'm not as well versed in my family history as I ought to be, or even as much as I would like to be, but that's mostly because I just am so busy. I don't really have a lot of time. So the family history that I do know is from stories that were told to me by my grandparents, particularly my grandmothers. And most of that even is from my mom's side, not my dad's side. And of course the Fletcher name came from my dad's side. And my grandma Fletcher did some research into the Fletcher line, but she mostly left that for my aunt to do research into. So I don't know as much about my Fletcher line as I know about my other lines, but I do know that my dad is like something ridiculous in line for the British throne. Something, I mean like something doable, but also it's never going to happen. So I do know that. I do know that we are Scots-Irish English with a little bit of Welsh on pretty much all sides of my family, and some of it branches off on my mom's side into France, where we were related to the French nobility. That's kind of like an overarching, but then of course there's my more immediate family history, where my dad's family comes from West Virginia, my dad's mom's family comes from Arkansas, and my mom's parents, both sides, are mostly Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. So that's interesting. I'm like that Confederate Yankee from the Mark Twain story, right? And I'll tell you, if the world hadn't changed to be much more mobile, I definitely would not be here, because I cannot imagine how my parents would have ever met if they hadn't both moved to the same state. Modern society is pretty amazing, to be honest. I mean, there's back in the day when you married the person that you knew your whole life instead of traveling across the country and running into a stranger and deciding to make a life together. But hey, whatever works, right? There's still people who do marry those girls and boys next door. So, whatever. That's kind of a general overview of my overarching family history. My family also has a really long history of military service. My dad was a service member. My brother is a service member. Two of my brothers are actually going into the service this year. And both of my dad's parents served in the Air Force, and we have World War II vets, we've got World War I vets, we've got Civil War on both sides, we've got Revolutionary War, we've got, back and back and back. That means I am a daughter of the Revolution. I've never actually signed up. I'm not even entirely sure how you do that. I probably should, just because it is a part of who I am, and I am very proud of that part of who I am. And that, I think, informs a lot of my present day patriotism, not just personally, but familially. My family is very, very patriotic. And that, again, has to do with the fact that we are very deeply connected to this country through the military, all the way back to the Revolutionary War and this original fight for freedom to have what we have and what we're losing, but that's a video for another day. Why am I talking about this? Why am I saying that it's important to know your roots? There are things that happen in the past that are not good things, and there are things that happen in the past that are great things. Most of what happened in the past just happened, it's not something that's either good or bad. It's just life, we don't really think about life as we're living it unless something really big happens one way or the other. But there are definitely things in my family history that I'm not super proud of. We never owned slaves. We weren't ever wealthy enough for that. But I do have, outlaws. I do have theft. There's gambling. There's bootleggers. There's murderers. There's horse thieves. There's all sorts of things like that. Adultery. And I think we were heavily involved in the persecution of the Mormons at one point. I don't know much about that, but that was on my dad's side. Definitely things that happened in the past, not super proud of, but I can't change that. It's already happened. It's already a part of my family history. The only thing that I can do with it is take those stories from my ancestors and learn from them, apply those lessons to my life, and do better than they did. Because if we don't look at the past, both the good and the bad, then the bad is much more likely to repeat itself, and the good less so. Because we get so caught up in the negative, in both the negative in the present and the negative in the past, that we hold on to it and we allow it to do awful, ugly things to us on the inside. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now with this constant, discussion about racism and hatred, and slavery happened and reparations. And yes, slavery happened. It was a terrible thing. Never should have happened. But America didn't invent slavery. Britain didn't invent slavery. Slavery has been around for eons, since basically one man looked at another man and said, I bet I can get you to do what I want you to do and not have to pay you for it. And it's constantly always been around. The word slave itself comes from the Slavs, where they were taken into custody. Basically, they were captured and they were forced into servitude. There's definitely a relationship in America's past with white people going to Africa to purchase slaves, but that in and of itself right there, they bought them from the Africans who had already captured them to make them slaves. And it was a terrible thing, and it never should have happened. But here's the thing. We learned from it. We learned as a culture that it was a terrible thing that shouldn't have happened, and we stopped it. So why are we dwelling so much on the bad thing that happened as opposed to the good thing that happened? That the fact that America and Britain, after eons and eons and eons of slavery being the norm, literally broke those chains and allowed the people who live in this country to live freely. So, yes, it's important to know where you come from because that informs a large part of who you are. But we can't dwell on that. We can't live in that space. It's not healthy to live in that negative space. We have to take the lessons and rise above it. We have to take the bad with the good and learn from both of them to do and be better in both the present and in the future. I want my nieces and nephews to grow up knowing that, yes, they had a terrible family history at times, but there are really good people in our history too. Like I said, we're descended from nobility. We're descended from royalty. My dad is nth in line for the English throne. Am I saying that, we need to have some sort of crazy revolution so that my dad can be the King of England? No, I'm absolutely not saying that at all. But knowing that there's nobility in our past as well as villainy lets me know that I can choose who I am right now and who I want to be in the future. I can take my past, both my family's past and my personal past. I wasn't always the person that I am. In fact, I really don't like the person that I was. I have learned and grown a lot since I was a child. I have 36 years of learning and growing. And that's not going to stop. In 10 years, I'll be a completely different person than I am now. And hopefully that person will be a better person because I've learned and grown and done better. It's important to know where you come from. It's important to know the bad things that your family has done. But it's also important to know the good things that your family has done. To know that within you, you have the capacity to be noble and great in all of the best ways. But also to know that you have the capacity to be villainous in all of the worst ways. And which way are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to dwell on and perpetuate the negative? Or are you going to rise above it and become a queen or a king in your own life? I choose to become a queen. That will mean different things to different people, but to me it means being valiant and virtuous, kind, deliberate, and letting people know that I'm there if they need me. I'm not perfect. I don't expect to be perfect. But I hope that as I move forward trying for perfection, that I can do my family proud. Because I don't believe that all of those evil things that were done in my family's past are the sum whole of who my family was. Yes, I know their stories, but I don't know who they are. And the more that I learn about myself, the more that I craft my own story, the more I'm able to recognize that there's real people in my past, in my family, who went through real hardships and overcame them as best they could in a multitude of different ways. And that's okay. It's okay to learn. It's okay to make mistakes, as long as you're trying to correct those mistakes and be better. So find out your story, your family's story, your history, and figure out how that applies to you now. Do you want to be more like that or less like that? And how can you learn and from whatever it is that you have in your past to be a better you in the future? I don't know what all that entails for me. I don't know what my future is going to look like. I don't know what all my past looks like. I want to learn more because I feel like that's important to my present so that I can learn to be the best version of myself, the version of myself that I am proud of, that I can look back on in the future and not feel ashamed or want to hide from it, but that I can own it proudly. Sometimes owning up to the past means owning up to your failures, means owning up to the things that you really wish you didn't do. And believe me, I've got some things. So if you don't know who you are now, figure out who you were then, who your family was. Because I can guarantee that has a lot to do not only with who you are now, but with the person that you're going to be in the future.